The wooden wagon jolted over another rut in the dirt road, and Margaret Hayes gripped the splintered sideboard to keep from tumbling out. Her father sat beside the driver, counting coins with trembling fingers, 30 pieces of silver that represented the price of his daughter's freedom. No, not silver, corn and firewood. She'd been sold for corn and firewood to a stranger in Montana territory, bartered away like livestock to settle her father's gambling debts. "Almost there, girl," her father muttered without turning around, his voice thick with whiskey and shame. "Man's got a prosperous farm. You'll eat regular, at least." Before the bitterness could fully form words on her tongue, I want to take just a moment to ask something of you, dear listener. If you're enjoying this tale of the Wild West, would you please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video? It truly means the world to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like Margaret's. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Are you at home, on a long drive, or perhaps working while you listen? Now, let's return to Margaret's journey into the unknown. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling grasslands dotted with sage, the distant mountains still crowned with snow despite the June warmth. Margaret had never seen country so vast, so utterly empty of the familiar Maryland hills and crowded streets she'd known. Her mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she possessed, pressed against her palm where she'd hidden it in her sleeve. If this farmer proved cruel, she'd run. She'd sell the ring, buy passage somewhere, anywhere but back to her father's house. The wagon crested a hill, and Margaret's breath caught despite her determination to remain unmoved. Below sprawled a valley green with cultivation, fields of wheat rippling like golden water, vegetable gardens arranged in neat rows, a sturdy barn and house built from hand-hewn logs. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and she counted at least 3 horses in a corral. This wasn't the struggling homestead she'd imagined. This was an empire carved from wilderness. A man emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, and Margaret's stomach clenched. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to challenge the doorframe he'd just passed through. His shirt, rolled to the elbows, revealed forearms corded with muscle earned from years of brutal labor. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and even from this distance, she could see the sharp planes of his face, weathered by sun and wind into something both harsh and striking. "That's Connor Reeves," the driver said, the first words he'd spoken in 2 hours. "Built this place from nothing after the war. Fair man, but don't cross him." The wagon stopped, and Margaret's father scrambled down with unseemly haste, already extending his hand toward the farmer. "Mr. Reeves, sir. As promised, my daughter Margaret. She's strong, can cook and sew, and she'll work hard for her keep." Connor Reeves didn't take the offered hand. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, moved past Margaret's father and fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He studied her in silence. The faded calico dress that hung too loose on her frame after months of her father's economizing, the bruise on her wrist where he'd grabbed her during their last argument, the way she held her chin high despite the shame burning in her chest. "Get down," he said finally, his voice deep and rough as creek stones. Margaret climbed from the wagon on shaking legs, refusing to look at her father. The ring bit into her palm, her escape, her insurance, her last piece of her mother's love. Connor Reeves stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. He smelled of honest sweat and hay, earth and leather. Up close, she could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was perhaps 35, maybe older. It was hard to tell with men who'd lived hard lives. "Your daughter," he said, never taking his eyes from Margaret's face, "was sold for corn and firewood. Is that correct, Mr. Hayes?" Her father shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it was more of an arrangement, you see. The debt was considerable, and you needed a wife to—" "I asked a simple question." The words cracked like a whip. "Was your daughter sold for corn and firewood?" A long silence stretched. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the fields. Margaret felt tears pricking her eyes and hated herself for the weakness. "Yes," her father finally admitted. Connor Reeves turned to the driver. "Give him half what we agreed upon. 5 bags of corn, 1 cord of wood." "Now wait just a minute." Her father's face flushed purple. "We had a deal. Full price, you said." The deal was for a willing woman seeking a new life, not a daughter sold into servitude against her will. Connor's hand moved to rest casually on the pistol at his hip. Not a threat, merely a statement. "Be grateful I'm giving you anything at all. If I ever hear you've tried to sell another human being, I'll come find you. And Mr. Hayes?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. "You won't enjoy that conversation." Margaret watched her father deflate like a punctured bladder. Within minutes, the wagon was loaded with half the promised goods, and the driver was turning the horses back toward the road. Her father didn't say goodbye. He didn't even look at her. She stood in the yard of a stranger's farm, utterly alone, with no idea what came next. Connor Reeves was already walking back toward the barn. "There's a room in the house," he called over his shoulder. "Take it. Rest. We'll talk at supper." "Wait!" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why did you reduce the payment? You made a bargain." He paused, his broad back still turned to her. "I don't bargain for people, Miss Hayes. I hire them, or I marry them, but I don't buy them. There's a difference." "My father will speak badly of you, ruin your reputation for honest dealing." Now Connor did turn, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. "Your father's reputation precedes him, ma'am. Mine will survive the comparison." He gestured toward the house. "Go on. You're safe here." Safe. Margaret couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. She walked toward the house on numb legs, climbing the 3 steps to a covered porch furnished with 2 rocking chairs and a small table. The front door opened easily. Unlocked, she noted with surprise. Who left their doors unlocked in this wild country? The interior took her breath away. It wasn't fancy. No Eastern parlors with damask curtains and gilt frames. But it was solid and clean and carefully made. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, shelves lined with books, and windows that let in the golden afternoon light. 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. A pot of stew simmered over the fire, filling the air with the scent of beef and vegetables. Margaret's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. But she didn't touch the food. She wasn't sure of the rules here yet. Wasn't sure of anything. Instead, she explored the room Connor had indicated. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a quilt that showed skilled needlework, a dresser with a chipped mirror, and a window overlooking the vegetable garden. A woman's room, she thought, or a room prepared for a woman. Margaret sank onto the bed and finally let the tears come. Silent, hot, furious tears, for the mother who'd died 2 years ago, for the father who'd become a stranger, for the life she'd lost and the uncertain future that stretched before her. She pulled out her mother's ring and studied it in the fading light. A simple gold band with a tiny sapphire, worth maybe $20 if she could find an honest buyer. Would $20 buy her freedom? Or would it just buy her another kind of prison? A knock on the doorframe startled her. Connor Reeves stood there with a bowl of stew and a piece of bread, his large frame filling the doorway. He didn't enter, didn't intrude, just held out the food. "You should eat," he said. "It's been a long journey." Margaret wiped her eyes quickly, mortified that he'd caught her crying. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." "Connor." He set the bowl on the dresser when she didn't immediately take it. "Just Connor." "Connor," she repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue. Too familiar, too intimate for a man she'd met mere hours ago. "Why did you agree to this arrangement? Surely you could have found a wife without purchasing her father's debt." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I didn't purchase you, Miss Hayes. I paid your father's debt to protect you from whoever else might have answered his advertisement. Men who wouldn't have reduced the price. Men who wouldn't have given you a choice." "A choice?" Bitterness crept into her voice. "What choice do I have? I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." "You have every choice." Connor met her eyes steadily. "You can stay here, work for your room and board, while you figure out what comes next. You can leave tomorrow if you want. I'll give you money for the stage. You can marry me if that suits you, though I won't ask for an answer today or tomorrow or even next month. But Miss Hayes." He leaned against the doorframe, and something fierce burned in those storm-gray eyes. "You're not property here. You're a person, and persons get to choose." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Margaret stared at the closed door for a long moment, then at the bowl of stew, then at the ring still clutched in her palm. Persons get to choose. When was the last time anyone had treated her like a person, rather than an inconvenience or a commodity? She ate the stew slowly, savoring every bite. It was good, rich and hearty, seasoned with herbs she couldn't quite identify. The bread was fresh, probably baked that morning. When she'd finished, she washed her face in the basin she found on the dresser, changed into the only other dress she owned, and ventured back into the main room. Connor sat at the table with papers spread before him. Accounts, she realized. Records of crops and cattle and expenses. He looked up when she entered, and she saw a surprise flicker across his face, as if he had expected her to hide in her room all evening. "The stew was excellent," she said. "Did you make it?" "My sister taught me to cook before she married and moved to Oregon. Seemed like a useful skill for a man living alone." He gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Can you cook?" "Yes, and sew, and keep house, and tend a garden. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Connor." "I didn't think you were." He stood, and she was reminded again of his sheer size. Not just tall, but broad and powerfully built, the kind of strength that came from swinging an axe and wrestling steers. Yet, he moved carefully around her, as if aware that his size might intimidate. "I rise at dawn to tend the animals. Breakfast is usually simple. Eggs, bread, coffee. If you're staying, even just for now, I'd appreciate help with meals and the house. In return, you'll have room and board, and a wage." "A wage?" Margaret stared at him. "You'd pay me?" "Why wouldn't I? You'd be working." He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and counted out 10 silver dollars onto the table. "This is for the first week. If you decide to leave, consider it travel money." She stared at the coins. More money than she'd held in months. "I don't understand. Why are you being kind to me?" Connor was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "5 years ago, my wife died in childbirth. The baby, too. Sarah she was fierce and strong, and she chose to marry me. Chose it freely, even though her family wanted her to marry a banker's son in San Francisco. That choice, that partnership, it was everything to me." His voice roughened. "After she died, folks kept trying to set me up with their daughters or sisters. Good women, most of them. But none of them were given a choice. They were pushed and prodded and paraded in front of me like prize heifers. It made me sick." He looked at Margaret then, really looked at her, and she saw the grief still lingering in those gray eyes. "When your father's advertisement reached me, when I read that he was looking to marry off his daughter to settle debts, I knew what kind of man he was, and I thought, here's one woman who deserves a choice. Maybe that makes me a fool, Miss Hayes. Maybe you'll rob me blind and disappear in the night. But I'd rather be a fool than a man who treats women like property." Margaret's throat tightened. "I won't rob you. I believe you." He moved toward his own bedroom. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day, and the farm keeps early hours." She watched him go, this strange, complicated man who'd reduced a payment to prove a point about human dignity. This man who still grieved a wife 5 years dead. This man who'd handed her money and freedom with the same casual gesture. Margaret picked up the silver dollars one by one, testing their weight. Real, solid, enough to buy passage east or west or anywhere she wanted to go. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the prairie wind whisper through the eaves, she found herself thinking not about escape, but about those fields of wheat, that well-built house, those steady gray eyes. Maybe, just maybe, she'd already found where she was supposed to be. Dawn came too early, announced by a rooster's crow and the sound of Connor's boots on the wooden floor. Margaret rose quickly, determined to prove her worth, and dressed in the half-light filtering through her window. When she emerged, Connor was already gone. She could see him through the window, feeding the horses in the corral. She built up the fire, found eggs in a basket by the door, and set about making breakfast. The kitchen was well organized, everything in its place, and she worked efficiently. By the time Connor returned, washing his hands in the basin by the door, she had eggs and fried potatoes ready, along with fresh coffee. He paused in the doorway, something unreadable crossing his face. "Smells good." They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, but not quite companionable either. Margaret kept stealing glances at him, trying to understand this man who'd upended all her expectations. In the morning light, she could see more details, the calluses on his hands, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the careful way he cut his food into precise pieces. "I'll need to ride out to check the fence line in the north pasture today," he said finally. "Coyotes have been testing it. You can come if you like, see more of the property, or you can stay here, whatever suits you." Margaret set down her fork. "Connor, what exactly do you expect from me? What is my role here?" He met her eyes directly. "That's up to you, Margaret. If you want to be an employee, someone who works for wages and has their own life, that's fine. If you want to consider something more permanent, in time, that's fine too." But I won't push you toward anything. You've had enough of people making choices for you. And if I want to leave, then I wish you well and give you enough money to start over somewhere safe." He stood, carrying his plate to the washing basin. "There's only one thing I require, Margaret. Honesty. If you're unhappy, say so. If you want to leave, tell me. Don't just disappear in the night. I've had enough of people leaving without goodbyes." The pain in his voice made her chest ache. "I'll be honest with you, I promise. Then we understand each other." He retrieved his hat from a peg by the door. "I'm going to saddle up. If you're coming, dress warm. It's windy up in the hills." Margaret made her decision quickly. She'd spent too many months locked away in her father's house, hiding from his drinking and his rage. She wanted to see this land, wanted to understand what Connor had built here. She changed into her sturdier dress and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. When she emerged, Connor was waiting with 2 horses, a large bay gelding for himself and a smaller chestnut mare. "This is Rosie," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She's gentle, good for learning if you haven't ridden much. I haven't ridden in years." Margaret approached the horse cautiously. "Not since my mother was alive." Connor moved to her side, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "Put your foot in the stirrup. That's right. Now grab the saddle horn and pull yourself up. I've got you if you slip." She managed it awkwardly, nearly losing her balance, and felt Connor's hand steady her waist. A brief, respectful touch that sent unexpected warmth through her body. She settled into the saddle, gripping the horn with white knuckles. "Relax," Connor said, handing her the reins. "Rosie knows what she's doing. Just let her follow my horse, and if you need to stop, pull back gently and say whoa." They rode out across his land, and Margaret felt her tension gradually ease. The morning was beautiful, the sky an endless blue, the grass rippling like water, mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Connor rode slightly ahead, pointing out landmarks, the creek that ran year-round, the stand of cottonwoods where deer came to water, the line of fence that marked his property's northern border. "How much land do you own?" Margaret asked, awed by the vastness. 640 acres, a square mile. I homesteaded the original 160, then bought the surrounding sections from folks who couldn't make it work." He glanced back at her. "It's hard land, Margaret. Beautiful, but hard. You have to fight for every acre. Fight the weather, the predators, the simple fact that nothing here wants to be tamed." "But you've tamed it," she said, gesturing to the ordered fields, the sturdy fences. "Tamed," he laughed, but without humor. "No, I've made a bargain with it. I work from dawn to dusk every day. I fix what breaks, replant what dies, and pray that drought or locusts or some other disaster doesn't wipe out a year's work. It's not taming, Margaret. It's surviving with style." They reached the north fence line, and Connor dismounted to inspect the posts. Margaret watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he tested each section of wire with practiced hands. He found a weak spot where the wire had been worried loose, coyotes as he'd suspected, and produced tools from his saddlebag to repair it. "Can I help?" Margaret asked, surprising herself. Connor looked up, clearly surprised too. "You don't have to. I want to learn. If I'm going to stay here, even temporarily, I should understand how things work." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or approval. "All right, come hold this wire while I tighten it." She dismounted carefully and joined him at the fence. He handed her a pair of leather gloves, too large for her hands, but better than nothing, and showed her where to grip the wire. As he worked, tightening and securing, Margaret found herself watching his hands, strong and scarred, capable of both power and precision. "You're good at this," she said softly. "Had to be. When I came here, I had nothing but a wagon, a horse, and the knowledge my father gave me before he died. Everything you see, the house, the barn, the fields, I built it myself, piece by piece." He finished securing the wire and stepped back to examine his work. Sarah helped. She was tougher than most men I knew, could birth a calf, shoot a rattlesnake, and bake bread that'd make you weep, all in the same day. Margaret heard the love in his voice, and the grief, and something inside her twisted with unexpected jealousy. Not of Sarah exactly, but of having been loved like that, completely, fiercely, without reservation. "You must miss her terribly," she said. Connor pulled off his gloves, his jaw tight. "Every day. But missing her doesn't mean I'm blind to what's in front of me." He looked at Margaret, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're not her, Margaret. I'm not asking you to be. But you're here, and you're real, and that matters." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode back in companionable silence, and Margaret felt something shifting in her chest. The first fragile stirring of hope. Days became weeks, and Margaret fell into the rhythm of farm life. She rose at dawn to make breakfast, spent her mornings tending the garden and the chickens, her afternoons cooking and mending, and learning the 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. Connor taught her to ride with confidence, to recognize the signs of changing weather, to shoot a rifle well enough to scare off coyotes. They were careful with each other, polite, respectful, maintaining a distance that felt safe but also increasingly frustrating. Margaret found herself noticing things she shouldn't notice, the way Connor's shirt stretched across his shoulders when he worked, the gentleness of his hands when he tended an injured animal, the rare smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. At night, lying alone in her small room, she thought about the wall between them, the careful space they maintained. Part of her wanted to breach it. Part of her was terrified of what might happen if she did. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, Margaret was washing dishes when she heard a commotion from the barn. She ran outside to find Connor kneeling beside a horse, lying on its side, its flanks heaving with distressed breaths. "What happened?" She dropped to her knees beside him. "Colic," Connor said grimly, his hands already working to assess the horse. "He got into the grain storage, ate too much, too fast. Could be fatal if we can't get him moving." "What do we do?" "Help me get him up. We need to walk him, keep him from rolling. If his intestines twist, he's done." Together they coaxed and pushed the horse to its feet, then walked him in slow circles around the corral. An hour passed, then 2. Margaret's arms ached from holding the lead rope, and sweat ran down her back despite the evening cool. But she didn't stop. Connor walked on the other side of the horse, murmuring encouragement, his face etched with worry. "This horse was Sarah's," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "She called him Dancer because he'd prance like a fool when she brought him apples. He's 14 now, getting old." Margaret heard the unspoken fear. "I can't lose him too." "He's strong," she said firmly. "He'll make it." Another hour passed. The stars came out, cold and distant. Margaret's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she kept walking, kept the horse moving. Connor glanced at her across the horse's back, and something like wonder crossed his face. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I can manage alone." "I know, but I'm here and I'm helping. That's what partners do, isn't it?" The word hung between them. Partner. Not employee, not boarder, but partner. Finally, blessedly, the horse showed signs of improvement. His breathing eased, his steps grew steadier, and when they led him to water, he drank deeply. Connor ran his hands over the animal's flanks, checking for tension, and Margaret saw relief flood his face. "He'll be all right," Connor said, his voice rough. "You saved him, Margaret. If you hadn't helped me keep him moving, we saved him," she corrected. "Together." Connor looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. She was a mess, sweat-stained, dirt-smudged, her hair falling from its pins. But something in his eyes made her feel beautiful anyway. "Together," he repeated softly. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Charged, aware, full of possibility. At the door, Connor paused. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I've been trying so hard to give you space, to not pressure you. But I need you to know." He stopped, frustrated, then continued in a rush. "I see you. Not as a housekeeper, not as someone I rescued. I see a woman worth saving, yes, but more than that. I see a woman who saved herself, who's stronger than she knows. I see someone I could—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I'm saying this badly." Margaret stepped closer, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Say it plainly, Connor." "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words stark and honest. "Have been for weeks now. And I know it's too soon. I know you need time. But I couldn't keep pretending." She kissed him. It was impulsive, probably foolish, but she kissed him anyway, standing on her toes to reach him, her hands fisting in his shirt. For one shocked moment he froze, and then his arms came around her, careful and strong, and he was kissing her back with a desperate gentleness that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Margaret whispered, "I'm falling in love with you too. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but—" "Forget sensible," Connor said, and kissed her again. They stood on the porch in the moonlight, holding each other, and Margaret thought, This is what I was waiting for. Not rescue, not security, but this fierce, mutual choosing. This partnership built on respect and work and slowly growing trust. I want to stay," she said against his chest. "Not as your employee, as your wife, if you'll have me." Connor pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure? You don't have to decide tonight. You can take all the time you need." "I'm sure." Connor, for the first time in years, "I'm absolutely sure of something." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then marry me, Margaret Hayes. Marry me and be my partner in all things." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in town, with the preacher's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Margaret wore a new dress, cream-colored calico with blue flowers, that Connor had insisted on buying despite her protests. He wore his best suit, uncomfortable in the starched collar, but handsome enough to make her breath catch. When the preacher asked if she took Connor Reeves as her lawfully wedded husband, Margaret said, "I do," in a clear, strong voice that rang through the small church. This was her choice, her decision. No one had forced her, bought her, or coherenced her. She was choosing this man, this life, this partnership. And when Connor slid a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, he told her later, Margaret felt the weight of her mother's ring in her pocket, tucked safely away. She would keep it always, a reminder of where she'd come from. But this new ring represented where she was going. The reception was held at the farm, with a few neighbors stopping by to wish them well. One of them, an older rancher named Tom Peterson, pulled Connor aside. "You did well, Reeves," Margaret overheard him say. "That girl's got backbone. Saw her in town last week. Shut down Harvey Mitchell when he made a crude comment. Told him a real man knows the difference between a wife and property." Connor's laughter rang out, genuine and surprised. "That sounds like her." "Just remember," Tom added, his voice turning serious, "Sarah was special, no doubt about that. But this one's special too, in her own way. Don't let grief make you forget to see what's right in front of you." "I won't," Connor promised. "I'm done living in the past." As the sun set and the guests departed, Margaret and Connor stood on their porch now, truly, and watched the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. "No regrets?" Connor asked, his arm around her waist. Margaret leaned into his strength, marveling at how right it felt. "Not one. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Margaret, I want you to know, tonight, tomorrow, every day forward, we go at your pace. I'll die before I hurt you, before I make you feel like anything less than cherished." Tears stung her eyes at the fierce promise in his voice. "I know, Connor, I know." He led her inside, to the bedroom he'd given up for her when she first arrived. Now their bedroom. The bed freshly made, with Sarah's wedding quilt that he'd kept tucked away for 5 years. Margaret touched the fabric, feeling the love stitched into every square. "She would have liked you," Connor said softly. "Sarah, she would have liked your strength. I wish I could have known her." "In a way, you do. Everything I learned about partnership, about respecting a woman's strength, I learned from her. She made me better, and now—" He cupped Margaret's face in his work-roughened hands. "Now you're making me whole again." That night, in the darkness of their bedroom, they learned each other slowly, two wounded people finding healing in gentleness and care. When Margaret tensed at a memory of her father's violence, Connor stopped immediately. "Go slow," she whispered, trembling. "It hurts, the memory, not you. But go slow." "I'll die before I hurt you," he promised again, and proved it with every careful touch, every whispered word of love and reassurance. He let her set the pace, let her explore his scars, the puckered wound from a Confederate Minié ball, the claw marks from a mountain lion, the rope burn on his wrist from a cattle stampede, and tell her the stories behind each one. And Margaret, in turn, showed him her own scars, not all of them visible, and let him kiss them with a tenderness that made her weep. "You're safe now," Connor murmured against her skin. "You're home." Home, yes. For the first time since her mother died, Margaret was truly home. The months that followed were not easy. Farming never was. But they were good. Margaret learned to drive the wagon into town for supplies, to negotiate with the merchants, to stand her ground when men tried to cheat her because she was a woman. She learned to read Connor's silences, to know when he needed solitude to wrestle with his memories, and when he needed her presence. Connor, in turn, learned that Margaret had a gift for numbers and organization. She took over managing the farm's accounts, finding inefficiencies he'd missed, negotiating better prices for their wheat and cattle. When a neighbor tried to encroach on their property line, Margaret was the one who marched to town and retrieved the proper surveyor's documents, proving their claim beyond dispute. "You're terrifying," Connor told her that night, equal parts amused and awed. Remind me never to cross you in a property dispute. Too late. Margaret replied with a grin. You married me. All property disputes are now internal negotiations. They were building something together. Not just a farm, but a life. A partnership based on mutual respect and slowly deepening love. Then, one crisp October morning, disaster struck. Margaret was hanging laundry when she heard the gunshot. She ran toward the sound, her heart in her throat, and found Connor staggering toward the house, blood streaming from his shoulder. Behind him, 3 men on horseback were riding onto their property, rifles drawn. Inside, Connor shouted. Get inside now! Margaret grabbed his good arm and helped him into the house, slamming the door behind them. Through the window, she could see the men dismounting, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men who'd lived violent lives. Who are they? She demanded, already moving to get the rifle from its place above the fireplace. Land speculators, Connor ground out through clenched teeth. The blood was spreading across his shirt, but the wound didn't look immediately fatal. A graze, thank God, not a direct hit. Been trying to buy the property for months. Guess they got tired of asking nicely. One of the men, clearly the leader, with a pockmarked face and cold smile, called out from the yard. Reeves, you've got one chance to reconsider our offer. Sign over the deed and we'll let you and your woman walk away. Refuse and we'll burn you out. Margaret loaded the rifle with steady hands, her fear transmuting into cold fury. No one was taking this farm. No one was taking the life she and Connor had built together. Can you shoot? Connor asked, pressing a cloth to his shoulder. You taught me to shoot, Margaret reminded him. She moved to the window, keeping low, and called out, This is Margaret Reeves. You're trespassing on our land. Leave now, or I'll shoot. The leader laughed. That's so? Little lady, why don't you let the men handle this? Margaret put a bullet through his hat, sending it flying. The laughter died instantly. I said leave. Next shot won't be a warning. For a tense moment, the 3 men hesitated. Then the leader, retrieving his hat with a murderous look, snarled, You'll regret that, bitch. We'll be back with more men, and when we come... Another gunshot rang out, but not from Margaret's rifle. She turned to see Tom Peterson riding onto the property with 5 other neighbors, all armed, all grim-faced. Problem here, Reeves? Tom called out. Connor, despite his wound, managed to stand and move to the door. Just some men who've forgotten how property rights work, Tom. That's so. Tom and his neighbors positioned themselves between the house and the would-be claim jumpers. Well, gentlemen, seems like you're outnumbered, and we take a dim view of men who shoot homesteaders and threaten women. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride out of here, and you're going to tell your boss, whoever he is, that Connor Reeves' land isn't for sale. Not today, not ever. And if anyone comes back here making trouble, they'll answer to all of us. We clear? The pockmarked man's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize defeat. This isn't over, he spat. Yeah, it is, Tom replied calmly. Now get. The men rode off, and Margaret finally let herself breathe. She set down the rifle with shaking hands and turned to Connor, who'd collapsed back into a chair, his face gray with pain. Let me see, she said, already fetching water and clean cloths. You shot his hat off, Connor said wonderingly. Margaret, that was necessary, she finished. She began cleaning the wound, her movements gentle but efficient. And I'd do it again. No one threatens my home. No one threatens my husband. Tom and the neighbors helped secure the property, checking for other potential threats while Margaret tended Connor's shoulder. The bullet had, indeed, just grazed him, painful and bloody, but not serious. She bound the wound tightly and made him drink whiskey for the pain. "You're going to have another scar," she told him. "Good. I'll match my wife." He caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "You were magnificent, Margaret. Fierce and strong and absolutely terrifying." "I learned from the best," she said, kissing his forehead. Tom stayed for supper, and over stew and bread, he revealed the rest of the story. "Railroads coming through next year," he explained. "Speculators are trying to buy up land along the planned route, force homesteaders out. Your property, Connor, sits right on a prime junction point. They'll keep coming. Then we'll keep fighting," Margaret said firmly. "This is our land, our home, and we're not giving it up." Tom smiled. "Good woman you've got there, Reeves. Reminds me of Sarah, but with her own fire." "I know," Connor said, his eyes on Margaret. "Believe me, I know." The railroad speculators did come back, twice more over the next month, but they found a united front, Connor and Margaret standing together, backed by their neighbors, all of them armed and determined. Word spread through the territory. The Reeves homestead wasn't an easy target. Eventually, the speculators moved on to weaker prey. Winter came, harsh and beautiful. Snow blanketed the fields, and the world narrowed to the farm. Feeding animals in freezing temperatures, keeping the fire burning, the simple pleasure of shared warmth on long nights. Margaret and Connor grew closer still, their partnership deepening into something unshakable. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Margaret reading aloud from one of Connor's books while he mended tack, she paused mid-sentence. "Connor? Do you remember what you said to me that first day about gold not being what you needed?" He looked up, his eyes warm in the firelight. "I said you're what I needed, and I meant it." "I didn't believe you then," Margaret admitted. "I thought you were trying to manipulate me, or that you'd eventually show your true colors. I'd been sold for corn and firewood after all. Why would anyone see me as more than that?" Connor set down his work and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. "Margaret Hayes Reeves, I have never seen you as anything less than extraordinary. From that first moment, when you stood in my yard with your chin up and your eyes full of fire, you were reborn that day, Margaret. Not as someone's property, not as your father's burden. You were reborn as yourself, free to choose your own path. And you chose this, chose us." Tears streamed down her face. "I chose you, and I choose you again, every day, for the rest of my life." "Then we're the luckiest damn people in the territory," Connor said, and kissed her. Spring came again, bringing new calves and the hard work of planting. Margaret discovered she was pregnant on a bright April morning. And when she told Connor, he wept. Tears of joy and grief intermingled, mourning Sarah and their lost child, even as he celebrated new life with Margaret. "I'm terrified," he admitted, holding her close. "I can't lose you too, Margaret. I can't." "You won't," she said firmly. "I'm strong, Connor. Stronger than I ever knew. And I'm not going anywhere." The baby, a daughter they named Hope, was born that December, in the same bedroom where Margaret had first slept as a stranger, in Connor's house. She was healthy and loud, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. And when Connor held her for the first time, Margaret saw the last shadows of grief finally lift from his face. "Welcome home, little one," Connor whispered. "Welcome to the family." Margaret watched her husband cradle their daughter, and thought of the frightened woman who'd arrived here 2 years ago, sold for corn and firewood, certain her life was over. That woman had been reborn, yes, but not through rescue, through choosing, through the fierce, messy, beautiful work of building a life worth living. She thought of her mother's ring, now tucked in Hope's future hope chest, waiting for the day when her daughter would need a reminder that she came from strong women who survived impossible things. But mostly, she thought of Connor's words, together. That's what they'd built here. A life created together, tended together, defended together. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. And as Hope's cries filled the house, announcing a new generation taking root in this hard, beautiful land, Margaret knew with absolute certainty she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was home. Epilogue. 10 years later, Margaret stood on the porch of the farmhouse, now expanded with 2 more bedrooms, a proper parlor, and a covered area for working in the shade, and watched her 3 children play in the yard. Hope, now 9, was teaching her younger brother Samuel to ride the pony Connor had bought last month. 5-year-old Rose sat in the dirt, making elaborate castles with a colony of very patient chickens. Connor came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. Gray threaded through his dark hair now, and lines creased his face, but he was still the strongest, steadiest man she'd ever known. Thinking about something, he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. Remembering, Margaret said, that first day when I arrived here, I was so angry, so scared. And now, she turned in his arms, smiling up at him. Now I'm grateful for all of it, the hard things and the beautiful things, because it brought me here, to you, to this life. I love you, Margaret Reeves, Connor said, as he'd said 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different moments. And I love you, she replied, as she always did. Together? Together, Connor confirmed, and kissed her as the Montana wind whispered through the fields they'd built from nothing but determination, partnership, and stubborn, enduring love. The woman who'd been sold for corn and firewood had been reborn as so much more. Wife, mother, farmer, fighter, partner, and she wouldn't trade a single moment of the journey that had brought her home. The summer Margaret turned 27 brought with it a drought that tested everything they'd built. Day after day, the sun beat down mercilessly from a cloudless sky, and the creek that usually ran year-round dwindled to a trickle, then to scattered pools, then to nothing but cracked mud. Connor spent his days hauling water from the deep well to keep the animals alive, his shirt soaked with sweat by mid-morning. The wheat fields, normally golden and abundant, withered to brown stalks that crumbled to dust when touched. Margaret watched him push himself to exhaustion, and her heart ached with worry. "You need to rest," she told him one evening as he came in for supper, moving like a man twice his age. "Connor, you're going to collapse." "Can't rest," he said, dropping into his chair. "If we lose the cattle, we lose everything. 5 years of work, gone." Margaret set a plate before him, beans and cornbread, stretched thin, because their supplies were running low. She'd already started rationing, making lists of what they could sell if things got desperate. Not the farm, never the farm, but maybe some of the cattle, the furniture, anything that wasn't nailed down. "We'll survive this," she said firmly. "We've survived worse." Connor looked at her with hollow eyes. "Have we? Margaret, I'm trying so hard. but I don't know if it's enough. If we don't get rain soon, then we'll figure something out. Together." She knelt beside his chair, taking his calloused hands in hers. "Connor Reeves, you listen to me. We didn't come this far to give up now. You built this farm from nothing. We defended it from speculators. We can survive a drought." "You sound so certain," he said, touching her face with wonder. "I learned from—" Margaret pulled out the leather ledger where she kept their accounts. "The Reeves farm has been a reliable customer for 5 years. We've never missed a payment, never asked for credit. I'm asking now." Mr. Paulson's expression turned wary. "Mrs. Reeves, with respect, half the farms in the territory are asking for credit right now. I can't extend it to everyone. I'm not asking for charity. I'm proposing a contract." Margaret opened the ledger, showing him neat columns of figures. "Last year, we produced 800 bushels of wheat, 200 pounds of butter, and sold 30 head of cattle. This year, obviously, the wheat is gone, but our cattle are still strong, and if we can get through this drought, we'll produce again. I'm offering you first rights to all our produce next year at a 10% discount in exchange for credit now." 10%? Mr. Paulson looked interested despite himself. "That's generous." "It's survival," Margaret said bluntly. "Mr. Paulson, you know my husband. Connor Reeves doesn't give up, and neither do I. But we need supplies, feed for the animals, food for ourselves, to make it through the next 2 months. After that, when the rains come, we'll make good on every penny. You have my word." The store owner studied her for a long moment. "You know, Mrs. Reeves, when you first came to town as Connor's wife, folks talked, said he'd bought himself a desperate woman who'd run at the first sign of trouble. But I've watched you these past years. You're tougher than leather, and twice as stubborn." Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes. But Mrs. Reeves, if you can't pay by spring—" "We'll pay," Margaret promised, "whatever it takes." She rode home with enough supplies to last 2 months, her heart lighter despite the oppressive heat. When she told Connor what she'd done, she saw a complicated mix of emotions cross his face: relief, pride, and something that might have been shame. "You shouldn't have had to do that," he said quietly. "I should be providing for." "We provide for each other," Margaret interrupted. "Connor, that's what partnership means. When you're strong, you carry the load. When I'm strong, I carry it. Right now, I'm strong enough to negotiate. Tomorrow, you might be the one keeping us afloat. That's how this works." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You gave me a choice," Margaret reminded him, "and I chose this, chose you, chose us, through drought and danger and whatever else comes. Together, remember? Together," Connor echoed, and for the first time in weeks, she heard hope in his voice. The drought lasted another month before the skies finally opened, releasing torrents of blessed rain. Connor stood in the downpour with his face turned skyward, laughing like a madman, while Margaret danced in the mud with her skirts soaked and her hair plastered to her face. They'd made it. They'd survived. That winter, true to her word, Margaret ensured every debt was paid. The farm recovered slowly. The wheat crop was thin that year, but enough to keep them going. And when spring came again, bringing green grass and full streams, Connor and Margaret stood on their porch and watched the land come back to life. "I was terrified I'd lose everything," Connor admitted. "The farm, our life, you. You'll never lose me," Margaret said fiercely. "I'm not going anywhere, Connor Reeves. Not for drought, not for speculators, not for anything. I chose you. And I meant it." He kissed her then, deep and grateful and full of promise. And Margaret thought, this is what love looks like. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but standing together in the hard times, refusing to break, choosing each other over and over again. 3 years later, on a crisp November morning, a stranger rode onto the farm. Margaret saw him from the garden, where she was harvesting the last of the squash, and her hand instinctively moved to the rifle she now kept close whenever Connor was working the far fields. The man was well-dressed, too well-dressed for a casual traveler, with a tailored suit and polished boots. His horse was a fine bay gelding, expensive and well-fed. Everything about him screamed money and power, which made Margaret's instincts scream danger. "Can I help you?" she called out, not moving from her defensive position near the house. The man dismounted, removing his hat politely. "Mrs. Reeves, my name is James Hartford. I'm an attorney from Chicago. I'm looking for Miss Margaret Hayes." Margaret's blood turned to ice. She hadn't heard that name, her maiden name, in nearly 8 years. "What do you want with Margaret Hayes?" "I represent the estate of her late father, Charles Hayes. He passed away 6 months ago in St. Louis. There are matters of inheritance that need to be settled." Her father, dead. Margaret felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a vast emptiness where those emotions should have been. The man who'd sold her for corn and firewood was gone, and she'd never have to see his face again. "I'm Margaret Hayes Reeves," she said finally, "and I have no interest in anything my father left behind." Mr. Hartford looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Reeves, I understand there was difficulty between you and your father, but legal matters must still be addressed. May I speak with you and your husband?" "My husband is working the north pasture. You can say what you need to say to me." The attorney hesitated, then opened his leather satchel and produced a document. "Your father's estate, what little remained of it after his debts were settled, amounts to approximately $300. As his only living heir, that money is yours. Additionally, there's this." He handed her a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Margaret's name was written on it in her mother's handwriting. Her hands shook as she took it. "What is this?" "According to the instructions attached, your mother gave this letter to a lawyer before she died, with orders that it be delivered to you if your father if circumstances required it. When your father died, the lawyer who held it contacted our firm to locate you." Margaret stared at the envelope, her mother's handwriting blurring through sudden tears. "Thank you, Mr. Hartford. I'll take the inheritance. God knows we could use it, but the letter, that's private." "Of course." He produced papers for her to sign, witnessed the signatures, and prepared to leave. "Mrs. Reeves, for what it's worth, your father's final words, according to those who tended him at the end, were about you. He said, 'Tell Margaret I'm sorry.' Sorry doesn't undo what he did," Margaret said coldly, "but I hope he found peace." After the attorney left, Margaret stood in the yard, holding the envelope, afraid to open it. Connor found her there an hour later, still frozen, still staring at her mother's handwriting. "Margaret?" He touched her shoulder gently. "Love, what's wrong?" She told him everything. The attorney, the inheritance, her father's death. And then, with shaking hands, she opened the envelope and read aloud. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and your father has done something terrible. I know him, you see. I know the weakness in him, the way drink and desperation can turn a good man cruel. I want you to know that you are not what he will make you believe. You are not a burden, not a commodity. not something to be sold or traded. You are my daughter, strong and fierce and capable of extraordinary things. Your father loved you once, before grief ate him alive. When you were born, he wept with joy. He called you his little warrior. But when I became ill, something broke in him. He couldn't face losing me, so he started losing himself instead. In cards, in bottles, in anger. Whatever he has done or will do, forgive him if you can. Not for his sake, but for yours. Carrying hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But Margaret, my brave girl, never forgive him at the cost of your own worth. You are precious. You are valuable beyond measure. And you deserve a life filled with love and respect and partnership. Find someone who sees you for what you are. A person worth saving, yes, but more importantly, a person who can save herself. Find someone who offers you choices, not commands. Find someone who stands beside you, not in front of you. And when you find that person, hold tight. Build something beautiful. Live the life I couldn't give you. All my love, always, Mother. By the time Margaret finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. Connor held her as she wept, for the mother she'd lost, for the father who'd failed her, for the girl she'd been when she arrived at this farm with nothing but fear and a gold ring. She knew, Margaret sobbed. She knew what he might do, and she tried to prepare me. She gave you wisdom, Connor said softly, and you followed it. Margaret, you found someone who gave you choices. You saved yourself, and we built something beautiful together. I forgive him, Margaret said suddenly, surprising herself. Not because he deserves it, but because I don't want to carry that weight anymore. He's dead, and I'm alive, and I have everything my mother wanted for me. She looked up at Connor, her husband, her partner, the man who'd given her back her dignity on the day they met. I have you. And I have you, Connor replied. Always. That night, Margaret took the $300 from her father's estate and added it to their farm account. It wasn't much, but it would help them through the winter. Maybe buy a new plow or more breeding cattle. She took her mother's letter and placed it in the box with her mother's ring. Treasures for Hope and Rose and Samuel to read someday when they were old enough to understand. But mostly, she stood on the porch with Connor's arms around her and felt the weight of the past finally, truly lift. Her father was gone. Her mother's love remained. And the life she'd built through her own strength and courage stretched before her, full of possibility. She was Margaret Hayes Reeves, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. The winter of 1885 brought news that changed everything. The railroad was coming through after all, and the junction point would be less than 5 miles from the Reeves farm. Property values were skyrocketing as the town prepared for an influx of new settlers and businesses. Tom Peterson rode out to share the news, his weathered face split by a grin. Reeves, you stubborn bastard. You held on to this land when those speculators tried to force you out, and now it's worth 10 times what it was. Maybe more. Connor and Margaret stood on their porch, Hope and Samuel playing in the yard while Rose napped inside. Margaret felt Connor's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining automatically. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "Thinking about choices," Connor replied. "We could sell part of the land, the eastern section, maybe, and make enough money to live comfortably for years. Build a bigger house, hire help, send the children to fancy schools. But But this farm is who we are. It's what we built together, from nothing. Every fence post, every field, every scar. He squeezed her hand. I don't want to give that up for easy money. Margaret smiled. Good. Because neither do I. Tom laughed. Figured you'd say that. But you should know, developers are going to come calling. They'll make offers, some of them very generous. Just be prepared. He was right. Over the next month, a steady stream of land speculators, railroad representatives, and developers made the trek to the Reeves farm. Some offered double the land's value. Others offered triple. One particularly aggressive businessman from San Francisco offered enough money to set them up for life. Margaret and Connor turned them all down. You're fools, the San Francisco businessman said, his face red with frustration. This land will be worth nothing compared to what I'm offering. You're throwing away your children's future. No, Margaret said calmly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Connor on their porch. We're giving our children something better than money. We're teaching them that some things can't be bought or sold, that home and partnership and self-determination are worth more than any amount of dollars. You'll regret this, the man spat. I doubt it, Connor said. We've faced worse than opportunity. Now, get off our property. After the last speculator left, Connor turned to Margaret with wonder in his eyes. Do you ever regret it? Staying here, living this hard life? You could have left that first month, taken the money I offered, and started over somewhere easier. Margaret thought about the question seriously. She thought about the girl she'd been, sold for corn and firewood, desperate and afraid. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, respected. She thought about Connor, about their children, about the life they'd built through sweat and stubbornness and an unshakable commitment to each other. Not for a single second, she said. Connor, this life, this hard, beautiful, impossible life, is everything I never knew I wanted. When I came here, I thought I needed rescue, but what I actually needed was a chance to prove to myself that I was strong enough to build something worth keeping. You gave me that chance. We gave each other that chance, Connor corrected. He pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. Margaret, I see a woman worth saving every time I look at you. Not because you need saving, but because you're worth celebrating, worth cherishing, worth fighting for. And I see the same in you, Margaret whispered. My fierce, stubborn, wonderful husband. They stood together on the porch they'd built together, on the land they'd defended together, and watched the sun set over the mountains. The railroad would come. The territory would change. But some things, partnership, love, the choice to stand together against whatever came, those things would remain constant. Hope ran up the porch steps, breathless and laughing. Mama, Papa, can we have supper soon? Samuel says he's so hungry he could eat a whole cow. Margaret laughed and ruffled her daughter's hair. Tell your brother we're having stew, not cow. Go wash up, all of you. As the children thundered into the house, Connor caught Margaret's hand. Thank you. For what? For choosing this. For choosing me. For being exactly who you are. He kissed her softly. You were sold for corn and firewood, Margaret. But you were reborn as something precious, something invaluable. Margaret smiled, her heart full. We were both reborn, Connor. The day you chose to see me as a person instead of property, the day I chose to trust you, we both became something new, something better. Together, Connor said. Together, Margaret agreed. and they went inside to the life they'd built, the family they'd created, the home they'd defended. And it was everything. It was enough. It was theirs. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Connor's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.